Welcome to the eCommerce Profits Podcast, where we feature top founders and experts in the e-commerce industry and take an in-depth look at the struggles and successes in growing e-commerce brands profitably.
Right. Hey guys, Josh Chin here. I'm the host of the eCommerce Profits Podcast, where we feature top experts and entrepreneurs in the e-commerce industry, and we go behind the scenes of the struggles and successes in growing a brand. Now, this episode is brought to you by chronos.agency. Now, if you run a direct-to-consumer e-commerce brand that is ready to scale and to double your customer lifetime value through retention marketing, Chronos is your company. We've helped hundreds of brands scale profits with email, SMS, and mobile push marketing, while getting an average of 3,500% ROI from our efforts. We've worked with brands like Truly Beauty, Elias Skin, The Udi, Dr. Living Good, and many, many more. Now, the next step is to email us at sales@chronos.agency, or you can go to chronos.agency to learn more. Today's guest is, before I introduce today's guest, actually, I just want to give a big thank you to Andrew Udarian at eCommerce Fuel. And go check out their website at ecommercefuel.com. They run an incredible podcast that I'm a big fan of called the eCommerce Fuel Podcast. It is an exclusive private community of incredible e-commerce entrepreneurs, pre-selected, pre-screened, so that you have an incredible crowd of very talented people in the same room. Go check them out at ecommercefuel.com. Greg Howlett is today's guest. Greg, thank you for being on the show. And before this, we're having a chat about your history and your kind of accolades of experience and achievements within e-commerce and outside of e-commerce. And you've been in the scene for a long time. You're a 20 plus year veteran in e-commerce, I must say. And Greg has generated over 100 million in revenue as a founder of multiple successful companies with multiple exits. He knows the industry inside and out since, I want to say 1999. Is that accurate to say?
That's right, 1999.
And Greg is the CEO of CaringSunshine.com and Cobblestone Trade, where he actively partners with brand owners to manage their online retail operations from end to end. His team are experts in online advertising, web dev, focused on conversions, branding, most importantly, order fulfillment, and scaling profitable e-commerce brands. So, Greg, welcome to the show. Super excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Greg, let's talk a little bit about your background. How do you end up, after over 100 mil in revenue and selling multiple businesses, you're back in the game with Cobblestone Trade. Why do you start the business? And it's not like a typical fulfillment company that people see out there in the space. Tell us about the business, why you started, and what makes it different.
Well, there's a couple of driving factors. I think the biggest factor is I just love doing this. Retirement for me, it sounds like drudgery. As a matter of fact, I keep every time I go into December, I say I'm going to take off December, because that's what normal people are supposed to do, right? You're supposed to take off time for holidays. And so I get through maybe a few hours on December the 1st and say, the heck with this, I'm going back to work. I love work. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing, obviously, but I love it. I have no interest in hanging up my spurs in regards to that. The other thing that really drives me is my family. And I have 4 children, and business has been really sort of a really big focus in our training of our children. So we're using business to train our children. And so I sort of look at this as a classroom to some extent. My children are all very, very involved. They're from high school on up to their early 20s. And so that's another thing that keeps me in business, is that I want to set a good example and teach my kids. So hopefully they'll be entrepreneurs down the road as well.
And so do you have them involved in your business at all?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My daughter, for example, is a logistics manager here in this warehouse in Atlanta. She manages it all. She's 19, doesn't come across that way. She thinks she's 45. But she's 19 and manages this warehouse and all of the inventory, the hiring and firing, and so on. And I try to get my children acting that way or operating that way, because there's really no reason, first of all, why they can't do it, and secondly, it's just a great training ground. She's also at Purdue University studying business, but I like to think this is, somewhat better than that business degree in terms of preparing her for real life.
And this is kind of like a battleground, right? It's like the real actual practice ground, where that this is reality, and what you learn in school is kind of the theory, and you get to apply that theory to something that's real. But Greg, give us a sense of what the business is like. How big is it? How is it structured? Do you have like people around the country, or are you guys all in Atlanta?
Well, we're about to open as a matter of fact, within a couple of months, we're opening a warehouse in the West. But yeah, right now our warehouse is here. Our people are here, except the customer service that we provide is all remote. That was a COVID thing, but it just makes sense. There's really, if you sit down and think about it, there's really not a good reason to have customer service people in a building anymore. Well, I shouldn't say there's no good reason, but it just makes sense, especially in a business like ours. So we're actually scaling customer service around the world, because we're trying to get bilingual and so on. And so we're actually actively recruiting outside the country and have people working outside the country. But the warehouse people can't pack orders from Ecuador. At least we haven't figured out a way to make that work yet. So the warehouse people are here. So that's pretty much what it looks like. And you asked about size. This year we're going to do about $6 million.
Incredible. And so guys, if you haven't checked out the episode that Greg did with e-commerce fuel with Andrew, definitely check that out. Greg, you've been in business for a long time, and I personally find it very difficult to get unplugged in many ways, including kind of, when you take a vacation, you feel this sense of just guilt of not being able to do things, and you like mentally you kind of go to a place where you're thinking about work, you're kind of checking your phone, you're checking Slack. It's so easy to get back into the work mode again, just because of how connected we are today. How do you kind of keep those things apart? How do you stay, or does that even matter?
Well, it's interesting you bring up that episode with Andrew, because in that episode I talked about a 5-week vacation we took in the summer. So we did a 5-week vacation, and I did unplug very well during that. I think it was just a little too much to ask to do December and June, the summer. I mean, and you could listen to that episode, but really what it comes down to me is way back in the beginning. This is 1999. I read the E-Myth. Have you read the E-Myth?
E-Myth? Michael
Gerber. Yeah. Is it Michael Gerber?
Michael Gerber. Yep, yeah. That's the one.
That book really, really changed the way I thought. I was too dumb to not believe. It's like so many of us get out in e-commerce or in any business, and we get pretty much sucked in a little too much right away. And I was so young, I didn't realize that was how it was supposed to happen. And I actually believed Michael Gerber. And I actually wrote down my list of, did the assignments in the book and really started focusing on process. And I guess I should go back a little bit further and say that when I came out of college, I was a software engineer. So I knew process. I knew logistics to an extent. And I was able to say, okay, well, we have something that needs to be done. Let's write a solution. If we can't buy a solution, which back in 1999, you really couldn't. The internet was very, new. It's not like you have all these SaaS applications that we have today. But we would write things and write code. And so that helped us right from the very beginning start building a foundation that did not need me. And of course, that's the key, right? I mean, if you're going to have a business and you want to have a life and you want to have a family and all these kinds of things, you have to create a business that doesn't need you. By the way, that's a big hit on the ego, right? We always want to have our phones ringing all the time. But the reality is, if that's the kind of life you want, you're not going to have much freedom. And so I've always focused on creating a business that does not need me. And I think that's a big, big key to being able to get unplugged. Because the reality is my phone doesn't ring when I'm gone, or very, very rarely. And so I was able to go up this summer and go 5 weeks, and I didn't get bothered except once or twice. And so I think that's really the key.
So on one hand, that's processes and systems that are put in place to make sure that things run despite you not being in the business. But what about decisions? I often find that to be a sticking point in kind of being the key executive in the company. A lot of really crucial decisions and crucial dilemmas end up on your desk. How do you avoid having to deal with that when you step away?
You're talking about decisions. I think a lot of it comes down to you have to be realistic. If you're stepping away, you have to say, okay, if we're going to be stepping away, we're sort of putting a lot of those things on pause for a month. And the reality is those decisions usually don't have to be made as quickly as you think they have to be made, right? Obviously, there's emergency stuff that may come along and so on. But in general, strategic decision-making sort of has to take a back seat. And there's something that I say, and I really believe it. I really believe that just like I need a break from my business needs a break from me. Because a business that is able to breathe a little bit, is able to grow. Strangely, it sometimes grows faster because things aren't changing as much. You have time for things to settle in, and we're entrepreneurs. I think fast, we work fast, we implement stuff. But sometimes if you're working too fast, you're just sort of running in circles. You're not really sure what's working yet. You're not giving things a chance and so on. So I think that's a big part of it. I think in general, in a lot of businesses, we could do with some more stepping back and not making bad strategic decisions for a while.
Makes sense. Now, Greg, let's talk a little bit more about Cobblestone Trade. You don't take on any clients that come knocking on your door. There is a process that in selecting the right clients to work with. What does that look like, and what's an ideal client/partner?
Yeah, you're right. We're very, very selective. We don't need a lot of clients, and really what we want is partners, because we have our strengths, but we also have our weaknesses. Our strengths are process, logistics, and we have a lot of obviously after 22 years of doing this, I have a lot of experience across the gambit. But really, when it comes down to it, we want a brand that's a solid brand that knows what they're doing. They have great reputation in the industry, but they just don't know how to do what we can provide, right? So we're looking for a partnership. Our partnership is all the logistical stuff from customer service, fulfillment, and all these other things. But we need to work with a brand that is a brand. It's got to be a legitimate brand in the industry, a brand that doesn't know how to capitalize on what they have. And in other words, when it comes down to it, we tend to leave marketing, the brand marketing, brand awareness to our partner. We've done it, but it's not really our sweet spot. Our sweet spot is everything that happens after that. And so those are the kind of partnerships that we look for. Something that really is a possible win-win that both sides are going to benefit from. We can apply all our processes all day long, but if a product can't generate sales, if the brand is not strong enough or the product is not strong enough to stand in the industry, then our logistics isn't going to get us very far, right? We're just going to be standing around. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for, really.
And Greg, from the outside looking in, you have been on top of the changes and the things that are happening in e-commerce for over 20 years now. And it's at some point it must get tiring. Like, shit, another thing to change. Nothing stays the same. What's your philosophy behind that? And I think it lends to the spirit of, kind of feeds into the spirit of Cobblestone Trade as well, and how you stay agile and on top of the game for for your clients and for the brands you work with. But what are your thoughts around that?
Well, things obviously do change a lot, but they also stay the same a lot. Um, when I think of the big picture stuff, um, it's remarkable how little has changed. It's like year after year ticks by, and you think, oh, I was doing this 4 or 5 years ago, and it's pretty much the same thing. At least the big picture thinking is about the same thing. Obviously, we could take something like SEO, for example. SEO is a great example because when I started in 1999, if you wanted the top ranking on Yahoo for a term, you paid $199 one time. You got a directory listing, you filled it up with keywords, and you're on top of Yahoo. And that's literally how easy it was. And then eventually PPC, what we call PPC, the paid advertising, came along. And in those days, and this is 2001, 2002, you basically sat on your computer all day long and just had a little bidding wars with another person. So you'd say, okay, I'm bidding $1, and then the person would be watching you and they'd say $1.10 for a click. And then eventually somebody would get to the point where they say, okay, it's too high, and they go back to 70 cents. And I know that sounds crazy, but that is literally how it was for a long time until Google started doing automated bidding. And so
Right.
GoTo eventually, unless I'm mistaken, became, I think Google bought GoTo, and that was the GoTo. Have you ever heard of
I
GoTo.com?
have not.
Yeah, this was,
GoTo.com. Wow.
yeah, these were the early days of PPC, the very early days, and it was not automated. And so
Right.
that was early search advertising. And of course, SEO got smarter and smarter, or Google got smarter and smarter with SEO over time. There was a time, for example, where all you had to do to get rankings was to have the most inbound links. And
Mhm.
so if you wanted the most inbound links and your competitor had 4,000, you go get 5,000, usually by buying them. And
Right.
so then Google figured out, okay, you have link farms, and links have different value associated with them. And so we've gone through this evolution. And now, of course, SEO is largely driven by the customer experience on your website. And so all the strategies have sort of changed, but the overall strategy hasn't changed, which is we need to be good at what we do. So Google wants to rank us well, and Google or any other search engine. And I've been saying for 20 years, if we want the top ranking on Google, for example, for a keyword, forget about gaming the system. Just be the best company. Be the company that they want to rank in that spot. And that is pretty much where the industry has gone. It's taken a while to get there. But SEO is a great example of how, yeah, there's been a lot of change, but a lot has stayed the same. And, I think if there's one thing that has changed that really makes it tough for new people coming to the industry, it's ultra more competitive now. And the competition you're going up against generally is, at least in some cases, well capitalized. They're going to have tools that newcomers may not be able to afford right out the gate, and so on. So I think the barrier to entry is higher, but
Mhm.
fortunately, I was already in. So that's the good news for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the same and it's different, and it does require you to be very flexible for sure.
100%. I think agility is key in a lot of things that we do in the industry that we're in. What are some common mistakes that you see from from the brands that you partner with? Especially, I know this is a big part of what you do as well, diversifying across different channels, across Amazon, eBay, and e-commerce, your own website. What are some common issues or mistakes?
Yeah, okay. So several. You mentioned diversification. I really do feel sorry for anybody that has all their eggs in the Amazon basket, especially now.
Mm.
When Amazon, for all we know, is not run by people anymore. AI is making those decisions, and it's just tough. I mean, it's tough to see guys that may be like one or two man shops that are doing, I don't know, they're making a decent living today on Amazon, and they'll have an email in their basket tomorrow, in their inbox tomorrow, that says, you're suspended for whatever. And it wasn't even a person that suspended you, it was a robot. So these are the kinds of things that are happening. The big other thing that we see all the time is not having a handle on advertising. And this is something that's been constant for 20 years as well. And you see people that are overbidding, for example, they're not watching numbers, they're spending in Google, which is sort of our world. And the ROAS is not there. And, I always sit back and say, well, they'll be out of business and out of the way. But the truth of the matter is there's always somebody else to jump in and take their spot. There's never an end to it. But people they have to, anybody that's going to try to spend money for advertising, they have to be on top of it. It is absolutely a numbers game now. And that's never been more the case, where all these numbers matter. That they're in Google Analytics and in Google AdWords. The stats are out there, but you have to stay on top of it.
Makes sense. Greg, outside of e-commerce, you have a different career. You were a musician for quite a bit of time. Now, just kind of bridging the two worlds, what were some of the best advice and or worst advice you've gotten from outside of e-commerce that you've applied to e-commerce? Tough question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never gotten that question before, but there actually is a lot of synergy between those two careers. So for people that don't know, I was a concert pianist and a recording artist. I have 10 albums recorded. I worked in that world for about a dozen years. And I'm going to give you like a 20-second little summary. When I started, I made a lot of money in e-commerce. And then I took about 8 years to give it all back and get right to the edge of bankruptcy through stupidity and bad decision making. And then we worked our way out of that hole, sold a company, and things have been really, really good since. But at the same time, I was doing all this craziness. I am a concert pianist. I'm recording, I'm traveling, I'm touring, and all this stuff. And it's strange, but e-commerce helped me in music because all the stuff that we were doing in e-commerce was coming in the music industry as well. And all this stuff is happening. On the flip side, and by the way, that really, really helped me because I'm a decent musician, but I'm not a world-class musician. I'm just I'm not as good as my numbers may make me seem. And a lot of that came from what I learned in the e-commerce world. On the flip side, music and marketing myself on music really helped e-commerce. For example, I learned early in the social media things that needed to be done in music. Though music's really, really important, or social is really, really important in music long before it became a thing in brand. In some of the other stuff we do. Another thing that would really helped from music is I learned to be generous in music. And it's easy to be generous in music because music doesn't cost anything to distribute, right? You're selling, files and so on. But we learned a lot of principles on that side that transition over to music or transition over to e-commerce as well. So there was a lot of synergy that went on between those two careers for a long, long time. But a lot of it did have to do with marketing. So the marketing what I was learning in music, I could apply and vice versa.
On hindsight, is there anything that you do differently in your career? I mean, you have two parallel careers happening at the same time. But for e-commerce specifically, is there anything that you do differently than what you do now?
Of course. I don't know how many people make this mistake. I told you I ran a company into the ground. Again, we were doing well. And then 6 or 7 years, I don't know, later, it was right in the middle of our big recession here in the US. I woke up one day. Well, I didn't wake up. I was in a hotel and looked at my bank account, realized, okay, I'm tapped out. All our debt lines, credit lines are tapped. My savings are tapped. We're right at the verge of bankruptcy. And how did I get to that point? Well, I got to that point because very simply, I was chasing excitement instead of chasing profits. In a lot of cases, I was saying, okay, I want to do something that's fun. So I'm going to go, and it'll cost a couple $100,000, but let's do it. We had a product that we were selling well online. Everything's going great. But I said, okay, let's go do it on an infomercial. And so we blew the money on the infomercial. And then we had a lawsuit that came out of that. And before long, we're talking about real money. And so that's just one example of all these times where I was chasing excitement instead of profits. And somebody told me once, and it's exactly the case. They said, making money is boring. It really, really is. Making money is a boring endeavor when it's happening. It doesn't feel like you're doing hardly anything. And a lot of times we have to make a choice between excitement or profit. I chose excitement an awful lot. And that manifests itself in a lot of cases by always, instead of just focusing, staying in your lane and doing what you're good at, you're always trying to start something new. And I'm not saying we shouldn't start stuff that's new. We should, sometimes you go up or down the food chain in terms of, if you're in marketing, maybe you want to buy the manufacturing company at some point. I get that. But you have to be very strategic and slow. Going back to that thing I said earlier about giving your business a little break from yourself. If you're just always just trying to find, in my case, I'm always looking for the home run. And during those days, and nothing was working. And I would try one idea after another and after another. Nothing works. The reality is almost all of us in this business would be better if we just focused on what we're good at, stay in our lane. If you're going to do a little bit of exciting things, pick up skydiving on the weekend, do something else, but don't necessarily play that game with your business, because in the long run, it's probably not going to work out. And that is easily the place where I lost, tens of millions of dollars, probably. I can look at decisions and see those decisions cost me enormously. And going back, of course, I would do it differently. But on the flip side, can't beat ourselves up too much over that either.
100%. It's that experience that gave you the ability to tell the story. I suppose, and that's a good reminder. If you're chasing for excitement, chase that excitement outside of your business. Absolutely. Good business is boring. Greg, you mentioned the E-Myth. What's one book that you feel e-commerce business owners should read today? Your favorite book or something that you recommend the most?
I read a ton, but I stay away from a lot of the I don't know what would I call those books. They become the business book of the year, and everybody forgets them tomorrow. The E-Myth sort of stood the test of time, but I'm thinking Good to Great and the Blue Ocean Strategy and all these kind of books. There's value in those, but on the flip side, those books end up usually at the garage sale. Let me tell you that I'm going to put in a plug for the thing by far. If there's one thing that I read religiously that impacts my business more than anything else, it's what you mentioned earlier, ECF, e-commerce fuel, which is not a book. It's a membership in a community with forums, active forums of people that actually know this business. They're not playing around. These are 7 to 9 figure business builder, e-commerce business builders. That is what has been the most valuable thing for me by far, right, in the past year or so. So I would probably say that more than any book. I hope that doesn't disappoint you, but that's
good. That's so good. Andrew's going to be so glad. That's a great testimonial. And e-commerce fuel is one of those communities that I feel have grown to a really significant size, but intentionally. It never got out of control, and Andrew's a very intentional entrepreneur, from what I can tell, and he's built the community in a way that is not just self sufficient, but also kind of I hate to use the word, but synergistic. Like they're the effect of having 1 + 1 = 3, but you have that across, like, how many members are in ECF right now? Thousands,
I
hundreds?
would say no more than a couple of thousand, but I would say there's several hundred that are active, and that was,
Right.
but yeah, it may not even be 1,000.
The impact of those couple of hundred active community members, the like from an outsider's point of view, it feels like the community is way bigger, way more extensive than it actually is, just because
Yeah.
of how powerful it is.
Yeah, it really, yeah, because people are participating, they're helping each other. There's no politics allowed, no, some of this other stuff that people get distracted on.
Yeah.
And that makes a big difference. I know I can go there and read things that are going to help help my business. So anybody that's not, if you qualify to join that community, I would do it tomorrow. Absolutely. Anybody that can, absolutely do it.
And Greg, what's the best way to connect with you for people who are interested to learn more about what you do in Cobblestone Trade and potentially partner with you? What should they do?
Yeah, they can go to Cobblestone Trade, do a contact. You can do a consult or book a 15-minute slot with me right on Cobblestone Trade. And goodness, that's the easiest. That's as easy a way as any.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
And links will be in the description, in the show notes, as usual. If you're listening in from Spotify or any of these platforms, you can go to chronos.agency/podcast to check out show notes. Greg, thank you so much for being on our show.
I enjoyed it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the E-commerce Profits Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get notified of future episodes.